Chapter 50-90. As time went by, there were more and more dragon martial artists in the hall where Kong Shinmu was located. In the first round of the trial, a total of 800 small worlds were opened for the dragon martial artists to compete with each other. Every pocket world would have 5 victors in the end, and they would be qualified to participate in the second round of the competition. Therefore, there were a total of 4,000 people participating in the second round of the trial. 4,000 dragon martial artists at least at the peak of the Dragon Emperor level, and each of them was the best among the Dragon Emperor level. They had a great advantage in at least one aspect, so that they could advance to the second round of the trial. It's really a gathering of heroes. Kong Shinmu was a little emotional. If he hadn't participated in such a trial, he really wouldn't have known that there were so many strong people in the Dragon God's world. In the Dragon Martial Continent, there were only a few Dragon Emperor level peak, and they were all at the level of the Dean of the Dragon Martial Arts Academy. As for the others, few could even reach the 5th level of the Dragon Emperor level. Those who could reach it could basically leave the Dragon Martial Continent and go to the supreme holy land of the Dragon God's world. Therefore, Kong Shinmu really had never seen so many strong people. The Dragon God's world had a deep foundation and deserved its reputation. If it weren't so, it wouldn't have been able to become the top race in the entire world. There were a lot of strong people in the Dragon God's world. Even if this war brought a lot of losses to the Dragon God's world, the people above the peak of the Dragon Emperor level who died in the Dragon God's world were less than 1/10,000th of all the people above the peak of the Dragon Emperor level. Because the overall strength of the Dragon God's world was too strong. The 122 Holy Lands did not include all the strong people in the entire Dragon God's world. There were also many hidden strong people who were dragon martial artists who did not join the Supreme Holy Land. There were also a large number of hidden strong people. 800 small worlds will be used as the trial venue. Each small world will be allocated 1,000 Dragon Emperor level peak dragon martial artists. That is to say, in these holy lands alone, there are a total of 800,000 Dragon Emperor level peak existences. Kong Shinmu was stunned by this number. He had only seen a little over 10,000 grade 5 disciples in the 5 extreme dark ice holy land. Now that all of the holy lands were added together, the number was simply too shocking. With so many dragon martial artists at the peak of the Dragon Emperor realm and above, only 4,000 could stay and participate in the second round of the competition. Kong Shinmu still wanted to get first place among so many people. The difficulty of this was undoubtedly quite high. Even an existence like Ran Ran didn't get first place in the end. It could be seen that there were still some very strong existences in the whole Dragon God's world. Of course, Kong Shinmu was still confident that he could get first place among the 5th-class disciples. His strength had already far surpassed this level. I heard that the rule of the second round is defense. That's right, it's defense. Everyone will be teleported to an independent space to defend against wave after wave of attacks. In the end, 128 people will pass the test and advance to the third round. In other words, we have to keep going until there are no more than 128 people left on the battlefield. Kong Shinmu listened to the discussion and couldn't help but narrow his eyes. In terms of defense, he had too much of an advantage. Not only was his defense strong enough, but more importantly, his recovery ability was extremely strong, and he could adapt to attacks in any environment. If it's a competition of defense, I should be able to get first place among everyone? Kong Shinmu still had some doubts about this. In fact, he thought of the arena battle he had participated in the Dragon Martial Continent. In that arena battle, he had seen an opponent with extremely strong defense. He had used the power of the heaven-deficient ice and fire demonic dragon to devour his opponent's time and spend dozens of times the time to blast a hole in his opponent's defense. That kind of existence's defense was probably even more terrifying than the current Kong Shinmu's. Of course, Kong Shinmu was still very sure of this. Even if his defense was not the strongest among the 4,000 people, it could definitely rank in the top 10. As for getting into the top 128, it couldn't be any easier. In the Great Hall, many dragon martialists soon received the news. Everyone was discussing the following defense competition. Then, almost an hour after they arrived in this hall, many light pillars appeared out of thin air in the entire hall. When these pillars of light appeared, the many dragon martialists who had gathered together to chat were pushed away. Everyone was now standing alone together. Then, everyone was enveloped by these pillars of light. Kong Shinmu also felt himself being enveloped by the pillars of light. Then, he realized that he had come to an incomparably vast small world. However, when he looked around, he could still see the pillars of light that were enveloping others outside of the pillars of light. In other words, we have to defend against the attacks inside these pillars of light? At the same time, we can observe the situation of everyone outside without any obstructions. Kong Xinmu thought to himself. Inside the pillar of light he was in was a small world. Outside of the pillars of light was still the Great Hall. He could clearly see the situation of all the pillars of light in the Great Hall, and he believed that the others could do the same. In other words, when he was defending against the attacks, the others could also see the techniques he was using. Fortunately, Kong Xinmu's defensive techniques were not shameful. Under such circumstances, he did not need to worry about anything. However, he could check the situation around him and see who could last longer under the attacks. Such an opponent was very likely to be his opponent in the third round of the competition. In the end, there would be 128 people. It should be an elimination competition where they would fight each other in pairs. It was obvious who was stronger and who was weaker. Of course, those who could make it to the final 128 people basically had the strength of a first-stage transcendent god. Ordinary peak dragon emperor cultivators would not have a high chance of winning in such a competition and staying until the end. Of course, I can't rule out the possibility that some very strong peak dragon emperor cultivators will have the strength to surpass the first-stage transcendent god. For example, the peak dragon emperor cultivators who are exploring the permanent intermediate ruins. Their strength is basically similar to that of a second-stage transcendent god. I wonder how many of these 4,000 people are at the peak of the Dragon Emperor realm? Kong Xinmu felt that there might be more peak Dragon Emperor cultivators among the final 128 people than the first-stage transcendent god. After all, the true limit of a peak Dragon Emperor cultivator was at least at the second-stage transcendent god. There should be quite a number of peak Dragon Emperor cultivators who had reached the limit, right? Chapter 5091. The new book, The #1 God of All Times, has already reached 1 million words. It's hot-blooded. It's #1 in terms of recommendation, popularity, collection, and sales. Please continue reading. The 5th class disciples were basically all dragon warriors on the 9th level of the Dragon Emperor. However, there were also 1st-level transcendent gods, and occasionally, 2nd-level transcendent gods. Now, Kong Xinmu saw 2nd-level transcendent gods in the hall. They were also enveloped by the light pillar. However, 2nd-level transcendent gods might not be very strong. On the contrary, those who looked older made Kong Xinmu pay more attention. After all, older people had more time to fuse with their dragon weapons. Most of the time, the true Dragon Emperor's peak dragon warriors were stronger than ordinary 1st-level or 2nd-level transcendent gods. Just as Kong Xinmu was pondering, an extremely powerful aura suddenly erupted from the small world he was in. This aura came from all directions. Kong Xinmu could clearly see terrifying golden waves appearing all around him. They were sword chi formed from metal-type power. They condensed into waves of sword chi that swept towards him. He could clearly feel that he didn't have much space to move around. He could only resist the golden sword chi waves that came from all directions. Guardian Stance. Kong Xinmu estimated the strength of the golden sword chi attacks and used Guardian Stance. However, he didn't use the dragon weapon Chen Xing because he estimated that the golden sword chi waves weren't to the extent that he couldn't block them. The subsequent attacks would definitely be more intense. He couldn't use his trump card right from the start. When his black dragon transformed into Guardian Stance, a black light screen condensed on the surface of his black dragon's body, enveloping his entire black dragon body. The waves of golden sword chi in the surroundings swept over, almost engulfing his entire black dragon body. The crisp sound of metal clashing rang out, followed by waves of power ripples that spread out in all directions. Soon, the golden sword chi light slowly dissipated. Kong Xinmu's black dragon body appeared in the center of the small world of the light pillar unscathed. This attack is already comparable to a normal Dragon Emperor's full power attack, or even stronger. Although Kong Xinmu wasn't injured, he could feel the destructive power of the golden sword chi waves. Fortunately, he had cultivated the divine dragon tyrant body technique to an extremely high level, almost reaching the sage level. The defense of the Guardian Stance was even more impregnable. In this attack, he was not injured at all. His black dragon body wasn't injured at all, and he didn't use any special techniques. At this time, Kong Xinmu began to observe the surroundings. In the hall, There were a total of 4,000 light pillars. Almost none of the dragon martial artists were injured. However, Kong Shinmu could keenly sense that some of them had already used most of their strength. In fact, some of them had even used their full strength to block this attack. It seemed that although some people stood out in the first round of the competition, their absolute strength was not too strong. On the other hand, the second round of the competition was a competition of absolute strength, and any trickery was useless. Moreover, in the face of the attack that erupted from the small world of the light pillar, no one could dodge it. They could only take it head-on. For some dragon martial artists, this was really not fair. For example, for dragon martial artists who specialized in agility and speed, this kind of competition was really not their forte. However, this was a very useful standard of competition in certain situations. After all, in many cases, speed was useless. Absolute strength was everything. Kong Shinmu discovered that a lot of the dragon martial artist's strength had been consumed. In the following second wave of attack, some people would probably start to be unable to withstand it. After all, among the 4,000 people who stood out in the first round, not all of them were experts in head-on combat. Some were only good at concealment, some were also good at assassination. Not everyone had strong enough defensive strength. The second wave is coming. Kong Shinmu held his breath and focused. His pair of black dragon eyes stared at the distant horizon. Soon, he discovered a gust of wind-attribute saber light rolling in from the surrounding sky. Countless wind blades spun towards the center of his light pillar small world, crashing down with a loud rumble. The sound of the wind sliced through the void, causing the space to tremble. Countless wind blades came from all directions, and in an instant, Jiang Shunwu's black dragon body was submerged in them. Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal, activate. The Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal with 800 defensive battle patterns and the dazzling gemstone made Kong Shinmu's defensive strength soar by 10 times. This time, the attack of the wind blades was clearly more than twice as strong as the golden sword chi wave. This forced Kong Shinmu to activate the Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal. A golden light enveloped Kong Shinmu's black dragon body, making him impregnable. He was completely unaffected by the surrounding wind blades. An extremely strong defensive ability. Kong Shinmu's defense had almost reached the limit of the Dragon Emperor at his peak. Even though he did not use his full strength, it was still more than enough to resist the second wave of attack. On the contrary, Kong Shinmu immediately dispersed the surrounding wind blades and looked towards the other light pillar small worlds in the hall. He discovered that there were indeed more than 200 dragon martial artists who had been eliminated in this round of wind blade attack. Everyone faced the same round of attack. It was as if all the light pillar small worlds were the same mirror image. This was the only way to ensure absolute fairness. Since it was the same attack, those who could resist it would be stronger. There was no doubt about that. Of course, this was only in terms of defensive strength. But wasn't this round of the trial a test of defensive strength? I've already eliminated 211 dragon martial artists. I feel that they are all dragon martial artists who are better at speed. Their head-on combat ability is not very strong. Some survived to the end in the small worlds where thousands of people were fighting. There were also some who relied on stealth and assassination to kill enough opponents in the small worlds where thousands of people were fighting. But the second round of the trial is a test of absolute defensive strength. In that case, speed and stealth abilities are useless. Kong Shinmu thought to himself. At this moment, he suddenly thought of the fellow with an extremely strong stealth ability who was in the same small world as him. How was that fellow doing now? Kong Shinmu searched in the light pillar small world in the hall, and soon found the other person in the corner of the hall where he had been previously. This fellow is still here? And he doesn't seem to be injured, nor does he seem to have used much strength. Chapter 5092. The guy that Kong Shinmu had noticed had a top-notch concealment ability. It was not inferior to Kong Shinmu's. Kong Shinmu could not detect this guy even with the enhanced perception of the ink centipede beast. It should be known that Kong Shinmu could even sense the concealment of the 5th and 6th levels of the Transcendent God stage. As for this guy, Kong Shinmu had to transform the Chen Xing dragon weapon into the bright battle rune to be able to detect him. Therefore, this guy had indeed attracted Kong Shinmu's attention. Logically speaking, if this guy was strong in a head-on battle, he would not have to hide in the pocket dimension until the last moment. Moreover, when Kong Shinmu attacked him, he did not react at all. Unexpectedly, this guy was able to withstand 2 waves of attacks in the second round of the defense competition. And he looked very relaxed. This was the key. Kong Shinmu could not help but pay more attention to this person. Then, the third wave of attacks came quickly. This time the attack was made of flames. Endless golden flames appeared in the sky around the pillar of light and surged toward the place where the dragon warriors were. This was an endless flame that seemed to burn the entire world. The sky and the ground were completely filled with golden flames, burning the entire space. Kong Shinmu could feel the temperature in the entire space rising rapidly, making him feel like he was in purgatory. Obviously, the third wave of attacks was more than twice as strong as the second wave. This made Kong Shinmu sigh. It seemed like he had to come up with a stronger defense method. Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal, Divine Seal Stone. The Divine Seal Stone could double the defense ability of the Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal. In a short period of time, the effect of the Divine Seal Stone made Kong Shinmu's entire body bathed in golden light. Under the golden light, the black dragon roared and soared in the sky. The surging waves of golden flames ignited the entire sky into a purgatory, enshrouding Kong Shinmu's black dragon body and burning it violently. Endless heat was transmitted to Kong Shinmu's divine dragon body through the golden light of the Great Sorrow Heavenly Dragon Seal. However, the heat was unable to cause much harm to Kong Shinmu. After all, Kong Shinmu was in a defensive state, and the physical defense of the divine dragon body was at its peak. The burning lasted for at least a quarter of an hour. After 15 minutes, Kong Shinmu's Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal, which doubled the defense of the Divine Seal Gem, finally disappeared. As the billowing golden flames receded, Kong Shinmu survived unscathed. When the surrounding golden flames dissipated, the first thing Kong Shinmu did was to look out of the small world. The first person he looked at was the hidden expert in the corner. He's still alive? Kong Shinmu squinted his eyes. That's right. This wave of flame attack looks very strong, but as long as he withstood the first attack, it wouldn't be too difficult to resist the rest. It's quite easy for him to resist it. Kong Shinmu did not know what defensive measures the hidden expert had used, but it was not difficult for Kong Shinmu to survive. Therefore, it should not be too difficult for a slightly stronger dragon martial artist. Kong Shinmu did not pay much attention to it. However, when he looked in other directions, he was stunned. What was going on? Originally, there were at least 3,800 light pillar small worlds in this hall. In other words, 3,800 people had withstood the first 2 attacks. But now, Kong Shinmu looked around. There were probably only 2,000 small worlds left. In other words, that wave of attack had sent at least 1,000 people out of this competition. They couldn't even withstand this attack? Kong Shinmu was a little surprised. In his opinion, although this wave of attack was strong, it was not particularly exaggerated compared to the previous attack. In the end, more than 1,000 people had been sent out. Currently, there are 2,435 surviving dragon martial artists. Next is the fourth wave of attack. A grand and majestic voice fell from the sky, shrouding everyone. This fourth wave of attack seems to be a watershed. That's right. It is said that in the previous competition, more than half of the people were eliminated in this fourth wave of attack. We must be careful. Everyone rubbed their palms together and became cautious. Kong Shinmu was also secretly paying attention. When he met Ran Ran had also reminded him to be careful of the fourth wave of attack. At that time, Kong Shinmu did not know what it meant. But now, he finally knew what it meant. After the fourth wave of attack, the surviving dragon martial artists would be given a chance to rest for a day. During this day, they could also absorb the energy of the surrounding dragon marks to cultivate. This was a great opportunity. One should know that the energy of the dragon marks in the Dragon Soul Holy Tower was more than 100 times richer than the dragon marks in the sacred grounds. Cultivating here for a day was equivalent to cultivating in the sacred grounds for 100 days. The effect was excellent. Therefore, everyone rubbed their palms together and wanted to resist this attack. And the fourth wave of attack finally came. Kong Shinmu could feel the sound of thunder gradually coming from the sky. Bursts of purplish-black lightning flashed faintly in the clouds and fell into everyone's eyes. This is a lightning attribute attack? Kong Shinmu squinted his eyes. The Great Compassion Dragon Seal had turned into a golden light that protected his divine dragon body. As everyone looked up, the purplish-black lightning in the clouds became more and more dazzling. The lightning flashed in the clouds also increased and even began to fall down. Thunder rumbled, and the space began to be filled with small purplish-black lightning snakes. These lightning snakes darted about in the air, each of them possessing an extremely terrifying destructive power. Kong Shinmu felt that if these lightning snakes appeared in the Dragon Martial continent, they could easily destroy several Dragon Emperor countries. It's coming! All of a sudden, thunder rumbled. All the lightning in the world seemed to have received a unified guidance and swept towards Kong Shinmu. It was the same in the other light pillar small worlds. All the purplish-black lightning swept towards the dragon martial artists who were undergoing the trial and fell with a loud bang. 10,000 lightning descends. At this moment, the lightning struck down. Chapter 5093. The brilliant gemstone had previously brought great benefits to Kong Shinmu. After the brilliant gemstone was activated, it could absorb the power of the Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal and condense a golden barrier. This golden barrier could withstand a full-force attack from a peak Supreme God-level powerhouse at most. However, the charging time of the brilliant gemstone was extremely long, and it could not be used at any time and place. After using it once, one would have to wait 7 days for it to be fully charged. Of course, for Kong Shinmu, his devouring power could shorten this charging time indefinitely. He could even use it again within a short period of time. However, that would only be possible if he could devour enough power. Another way was to use the Dragon Soldier Chen Xing's Spectral Battle Runes. Spectral Battle Runes could store enough energy and then recharge dazzling materials that needed to be recharged at critical times. For example, the Brilliant Gemstone. Unfortunately, the Spectral Battle Runes could not be used to their full effect now. At the very least, Kong Shinmu would have to wait until he reached the Supreme God level before it could be used normally. Now, it was probably only enough to recharge the Brilliant Gemstone half a time. Of course, this was enough for Kong Shinmu. At this moment, the power of the Brilliant Gemstone exploded. The surroundings of Jiang Shenwu's black dragon body were completely enveloped by a golden protective barrier. All of the lightning was repelled, unable to harm him at all. At the same time, Kong Shinmu continued to devour the power of the surrounding lightning to recharge the Brilliant Gemstone. Spectral Battle Runes. Devour. The power that the Spectral Battle Runes had been absorbing and storing erupted and was channeled into the Brilliant Gemstone. Although only half of the Brilliant Gemstone had been charged, as the power of the lightning that Kong Shinmu devoured was continuously converted, the power of the Brilliant Gemstone was actually fully charged in a short period of time. The terrifying lightning attack did not last for too long. By the time the golden protective barrier of Kong Shinmu's Brilliant Gemstone was destroyed, the lightning attack was already in the process of dissipating. Next, Kong Shinmu did not need to use the Brilliant Gemstone anymore. Moreover, the Brilliant Gemstone could still be used now. This meant that Kong Shinmu could block one more attack. I can use the Brilliant Gemstone to block one attack every 2 times. The corners of Kong Shinmu's mouth curled up. This was the strength of the Brilliant Ruby Stone. It was a pity that the Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal had too few defensive patterns. Otherwise, it would have been possible for it to withstand the attack of a supreme powerhouse. There was no need to think about it now. Kong Shinmu was wondering if he should use the Brilliant Gem on Chen Xing too. This way, he would be able to work better with his Spectre Battle Runes. But after some thought, he decided against it. Although the Brilliant Ruby Stone was powerful, its weakness was also very obvious. It needed to be charged, so it couldn't be used as a permanent defense. Especially during a sustained battle. Most of the time, Kong Shinmu could not devour enough energy to charge the Brilliant Ruby Stone. Under such circumstances, he would easily miscalculate if he only relied on the Brilliant Ruby Stone. Therefore, it would be better to dazzle other defensive materials so that his defensive power could reach a certain height at all times. After the thunderous attack, Kong Shinmu survived unscathed. However, as he looked around, he realized that the others were not in a good state. There were originally more than 2,400 people left. However, after the 4th thunderous attack, there were only about 1,000 people left. Among these 1,000 people, more than half were slightly injured. It could be seen that the thunderous attack was quite terrifying. If Kong Shinmu hadn't used the Brilliant Gemstone for defense, he would have had to use the Chen Xing Dragon Weapon. Fortunately, the existence of the Brilliant Gemstone allowed Kong Shinmu to be fearless. There was no need to use the Chen Xing dragon weapon for now. There are 981 people left. In the end, only 128 people can stay and advance to the third round. In other words, there will be at least 2 or 3 more attacks. Based on the previous situation, each attack is twice as strong as the previous one. If I fully activate my defense, I can block at least 10 more attacks. Kong Xinmu estimated the limit of his defense. He looked around, constantly observing the other opponents. This was especially so for the hidden expert. He had survived the thunderous attack and seemed to be uninjured. He had transformed into a black dragon that was faintly discernible. He was inconspicuous in the corner of the hall. However, at this time, Kong Xinmu noticed a few special people. These guys were all in the hall. So far, they hadn't suffered any injuries at all. Moreover, they seemed to be defending quite easily. There are 4 people at level 2 of the Transcendent God. There are at least 6 people at level 1 of the Transcendent God. Also, there are at least 10 people at the Dragon Emperor's Peak, ultimate powerhouses. As Kong Xinmu observed carefully, he had already locked onto the opponents that could pose a threat to him. At the same time, Kong Xinmu knew very well that he was already on someone else's watch list. After all, up until now, Jiang Xinwu had been able to easily block every single one of their attacks. In the eyes of others, he was also an ultimate powerhouse at the peak of the Dragon Emperor's Peak. There were still quite a number of such powerhouses. After all, the majority of the 5th-class disciples were at the peak of the Dragon Emperor's Peak. Many of the level 1 of the Transcendent Gods had been promoted to the 6th-class disciples and would not participate in this competition. No matter what, there were at least dozens of people that Kong Xinmu saw that could pose a threat to him. As for the specific strength of each of them, Kong Xinmu could not estimate it. After all, he could not directly sense the strength of others through the light pillar's small world. It was difficult to accurately grasp it just by looking at it. Therefore, he would have to see their performance when the time came. Next, I'll rest for a day. As Kong Xinmu thought about this, he realized that the light pillar that enveloped him suddenly disappeared. The scenery of the small world also quickly faded away. He reappeared in the hall. I can cultivate as much as I can during this rest day. Of course, most people won't use this little time to cultivate. Instead, they should be preparing for the next round. Kong Xinmu thought to himself. The second round was a competition of defense. Whoever could stand until the end would advance to the third round. Chapter 5094. This small test was aimed at every dragon warrior who could advance to the third round. They would form teams of 2 to challenge some dragon soul golems. If they succeeded, they would naturally be rewarded. If they failed, there would be no punishment. However, it was said that if they performed well in this small test, the reward they would receive would be quite high. It was not inferior to obtaining a ranking in the final round. Up until now, every dragon warrior who participated in the test had actually obtained a final point. From the beginning of the small world battle to the second round of the defense test, everyone would have a final point. Then, the final points of the dragon warriors of each supreme sacred ground would be added up to the final score of the sacred ground. According to their performance, the Dragon Soul Holy Tower would score every dragon warrior who participated in the test. The small test before the third round of the competition would not affect the score of every dragon warrior. However, it was said that it would affect the behind-the-scenes evaluation of the dragon warriors by the Dragon Soul Holy Tower. The score of the competition was just a superficial score. It would only affect the ranking of the supreme sacred grounds. However, the behind-the-scenes evaluation was the true evaluation of a dragon warrior by the Dragon Soul Holy Tower. If the evaluation was high enough, one could even obtain a Dragon Soul Heart. Of course, no one had obtained a Dragon Soul Heart in this competition between the sacred grounds. However, no one could rule out this possibility. Therefore, in the small test before the final ranking, many people would still give their all. Even if it was not for the illusory recognition of the Dragon Soul Heart, it was for the possibility of obtaining a super reward. In the small test, if a team of 2 could defeat a Dragon Soul Golem, the reward would be quite generous. It even included some extremely rare materials, cultivation resources, and so on. However, considering all of these was still a little far for most dragon warriors. Now that they had a day's rest, the second round of the defense test had just begun. But that doesn't stop me from finding my teammates for the small test in advance. Zhang Shenwu narrowed his eyes. Then, he stood up and walked toward the inconspicuous skinny young man who was hiding in the corner. Many people wanted to extend an olive branch to Kong Shenmu. After all, in the previous 4 attacks, Kong Shenmu's performance was quite good. It was enough to make people think that he was very strong. If they teamed up with him for a small test, they would have a good chance of winning. However, when they saw that Kong Shenmu had left, they could only give up. It was obvious that Kong Shenmu had other candidates in mind. Kong Shenmu ignored the restlessness of the people around him and walked straight to the corner. How about a small test together? Kong Shenmu said bluntly to the hidden expert. Before transforming into a dragon, this hidden powerhouse was a skinny young man dressed in black. He raised his head in surprise, a look of surprise on his childish face. You want to come with me? Back in the small world, when there were only the 2 of us left, I couldn't even take a single blow from you. Let me handle the frontal battle. Kong Shenmu said with a smile. Challenging the Dragon Soul Golem doesn't mean that the stronger the frontal battle ability, the more useful it is. Of course, if you want to challenge the Dragon Soul Golem, you have to advance to the 3rd round and become one of the 128 people. I'll try my best. The thin young man smiled bitterly. I'm not good at defense. But your performance up to now has been very good. After saying this, Kong Shenmu turned and left calmly. The thin young man looked very honest, but Kong Shenmu knew very well that this wasn't his nature. It was very likely that this guy wasn't as harmless as he looked. On the contrary, this guy might be extremely dangerous. Otherwise, why would this guy need such a strong concealment ability? He probably developed in this direction because he had a need. Therefore, Kong Shenmu still kept an eye on him and didn't say much. As for whether they could really go together and participate in the small test to challenge the Dragon Soul Golem together, it would depend on whether this guy could advance to the 3rd round. One day later, Kong Shenmu had regained his peak state. Of course, if it were someone else, they wouldn't be able to use the brilliant ruby stone a second time after using it once. But Kong Shenmu could use it again. Kong Shenmu had devoured a lot of the lightning power of the 4th wave of attacks, and directly used it with the spectral battle runes to fill the brilliant ruby stone with power. There are less than 1,000 people left. The attack this time isn't the same as the previous 4 waves. Instead, it will be endless. In other words, the next defense requires us to defend continuously, one wave after another, without any pause in between. This will test the Dragon Warrior's continuous combat ability. Whoever can last until the end will advance to the 3rd round of the competition. Whoever's combat ability isn't good enough will be disqualified. Kong Shenmu knew that the next moment was the most critical moment. The previous 4 attacks were only to eliminate the Dragon Warrior disciples who were obviously unqualified. Now, the Dragon Soul Sacred Tower was finally getting serious. Everyone was in this hall. Some of them had already visited many other Dragon Warriors and planned to form teams within this day. But none of this mattered to Kong Shenmu. All he needed to know was that he had to persist for a long time in the next barrage of attacks. He had to do it, or he would be the last one to give up. The attack is about to begin. Everyone was once again shrouded by the light pillar, and within the light pillar, a vast space like a small world appeared again. Kong Shenmu and the other Dragon Warriors entered a tense state once again. Dragon Souls, descend! Along with these majestic voices, Kong Shenmu and the other Dragon Warriors felt the space within the light pillar's small world begin to tremble almost at the same time. Countless mystical dragon souls appeared on the horizon of the small world. The appearance of these divine dragon souls made the expressions of Kong Shenmu and the others change. Following that, endless attacks of various attributes burst forth from the souls of these divine dragons. These divine dragon souls seemed to come from dead divine dragons, and they were real divine dragons. They didn't use all their strength, but seemed to be just playing around as they attacked the dragon warriors in the center of the small world with all kinds of attacks. However, to Kong Shenmu and the others, it was like a terrifying attack that shook the heavens and earth. Lightning, flame, gale, darkness. Chapter 5095. The divine dragon souls erupted with endless attacks, attacking every dragon warrior disciple shrouded in the light pillar. Facing the attacks of so many divine dragon souls, Kong Shenmu's expression also changed slightly. There was no doubt that the attacks of these divine dragon souls were quite tyrannical, more than a level stronger than the previous 3 attacks. Celestial Star. Defensive Battle Rune Conversion. The battle runes in the Dragon Soldier Celestial Star were completely converted into defensive battle runes at this moment. The effect of a total of more than 6,000 battle runes, even if Kong Shin-Mu could only unleash 30% of them, it could increase his defensive ability by more than 20 times. Coupled with the Divine Dragon Tyrant Body Technique's defensive stance, Kong Shin-Mu's Divine Dragon Body became indestructible once again. The attacks that erupted from the endless dragon souls finally arrived with a loud boom, finally hitting Kong Shin-Mu's Divine Dragon Body. However, Kong Shin-Mu was in a state of almost immobility now. These continuous attacks had almost no effect on Kong Shin-Mu. Although the attacks of these Divine Dragon souls were tyrannical, it was not enough to make Kong Shin-Mu feel troubled. However, the attacks of the Divine Dragon souls did not stop, and they continued to attack. Wave after wave of attacks swept over constantly. These attacks were stronger every moment than before. Apart from Kong Shin-Mu, among the other dragon warriors who were still in the second round of competition, some already felt the pressure, and some even could not hold on any longer. The attacks of these divine dragon souls were already much stronger than the previous 3 waves of attacks. It was normal for some to be unable to hold on. When Kong Shin-Mu was feeling very relaxed, he could feel that there were fewer and fewer dragon warriors left in the entire hall. There were constantly people who could not hold on under the attacks of the divine dragon souls and were eliminated. Kong Shin-Mu continued to resist the attacks, and even at this time, he was constantly devouring the power of those divine dragon souls. These attacks had all kinds of attributes, such as thunder, ice, fire, and so on. These powers were devoured by Kong Shin-Mu, gradually increasing his resistance to the corresponding attribute power, making him even more tyrannical, and his defensive ability even more terrifying. The Divine Dragon Soul continued to attack the dragon martial artists in the small world of the Light Pillar. 1 incense stick's worth of time. 1.5 hours. 2 hours. 4 hours. Soon, Kong Shin-Mu persisted for 6 hours. At this time, the offensive strength of the Divine Dragon Souls was already more than 10 times stronger than at the beginning. Of course, Kong Shin-Mu didn't feel much pressure. Although the attack was 10 times stronger, his Chen Xing dragon weapon could hold on until now. If it was a matter of energy consumption, it was not a problem for Kong Shin-Mu. As he continued to devour, Kong Shin-Mu always maintained his peak state, and his body was always overflowing with energy. Moreover, he had been continuously devouring, allowing his resistance towards every type of elemental power to reach its peak. This made it even easier for him to defend, and he had yet to unleash the full power of the Chen Xing dragon weapon. However, at this time, almost all the other dragon warriors in the hall had been eliminated. Other than Kong Shin-Mu, the other dragon martial artists were in an abyss of suffering. Some dragon martial artists managed to withstand the first wave of divine dragon soul attacks, but the continuous attacks after that made them exhausted, and they didn't have enough energy to persevere. These were people who did not cultivate body-tempering dragon martial techniques, but only cultivated some defensive dragon martial techniques. They constantly unleashed their defensive dragon martial techniques, breaking one layer and condensing another layer. In this way, their energy consumption was extremely severe, and in this competition, they were unable to consume recovery elixirs and the like. This made their energy constantly depleted, until finally all their energy was exhausted, and they could no longer condense their defensive dragon martial techniques, hence they failed. After the Divine Dragon Soul's attack lasted for 6 hours, there were finally only a final 128 people left in the hall. Kong Shin-Mu was one of them. And the hidden expert that he was paying attention to, the skinny youth, was impressively also among them. This guy actually persisted until now. In Kong Shin-Mu's observation, this skinny youth's defensive means were still very strong, but he did not use a defensive dragon martial technique, but like Kong Shin-Mu, he cultivated a body-tempering dragon martial technique. Although he was not as strong as Kong Shin-Mu, he also used a space attribute dragon martial technique, which could transfer a part of the surrounding attack power to another space. This guy's understanding of the space attribute is also not bad. It seems that his concealment ability is related to this. Kong Shin-Mu thought in his heart. In the end, there were only 128 people left in the hall, and these were the candidates for the final battle. For some dragon martial artists, to be able to become one of the 128 people was already quite good, and they had almost exhausted all their energy. The top 128. This meant that these dragon martial artists who were still in the hall, if placed in their respective holy lands, were almost all the best existences. It should be known that there were only a total of 122 holy lands in the Dragon God world. Therefore, those who were gathered here now were the elites of each holy land. Kong Shinmu did not know if there were still disciples of the 5 extreme dark ice holy land here, but he was determined to win first place. I didn't expect that in the 4th class disciple competition, Ran and the others actually all survived until the end. Kong Shinmu was somewhat gratified. Logically speaking, this round of defense competition was indeed the home ground for Ran, but for Xiao Yuhua, Xiao Bai, and Liang Xiao, it was not much of an advantage. But they all stayed, and in the end, they all obtained a rather good ranking. Even they could obtain such a good result, Kong Shinmu naturally did not want to fall behind. The first round was already the best result, so Kong Shinmu was bound to create the best result in the second round. Next, the dragon martial artists who could not withstand the defense would not be sent out of the hall. Instead, the surrounding light pillars disappeared, allowing them to see the defense situation of the other people in the hall. This was considered a kind of fairness, and some people could also make a choice based on this. If they wanted to compete for a ranking in the second round of defense, then they would continue to resist the attacks of the Dragon God's soul. But if they wanted to compete for the final ranking, then they could give up now and observe the situation of the others. Of course, the ranking in this defense round would definitely add points in the end, but compared to the points added in the final battle, it seemed somewhat insignificant. Some dragon martial artists were not good at defense, but in a one-on-one battle, they could completely unleash extremely strong combat power. Chapter 5096. Although he only needed to display his advantage in defense in this round, just observing the situation of defense could already bring about a considerable change in the battle situation. Being familiar with the opponent's defense would undoubtedly give him the upper hand in a one-on-one battle. Of course, Kong Shinmu was now crushing the others in all aspects, so he had nothing to fear. More and more people withdrew from the defense round. Kong Shinmu was still continuing. He wanted to challenge his limits. For 6 hours, he didn't feel any pressure at all. When it reached 8 hours, the intensity of the attacks from the surrounding divine dragon souls doubled again. At this time, even Kong Shinmu felt a little pressure. The defensive power condensed by the Chen Xing dragon weapon made Kong Shinmu's physical strength of the divine dragon body extremely terrifying. Even though the attacks from the surrounding divine dragon souls kept increasing, they couldn't hurt him. However, Kong Shinmu could feel that if the surrounding attacks became stronger, he would soon feel the pressure. Now, he was already showing signs of being unable to resist. Of course, at the same time, the other dragon martial artists in the hall had basically given up on defending. There were less than 30 people still defending within the light pillar. The skinny young man that Kong Shinmu was paying attention to had finally given up on the light pillar not long ago. This guy actually couldn't hold on much longer, but he continued to resist. Even when the black dragon body was blasted into blood red, he didn't give up. In the end, he ranked 30th in the defense round. The 30th place might be the goal that he set for himself, or it might be the goal that others set for him. In short, when this guy saw that there were only 30 people left in the hall, he directly became discouraged and gave up on defending. And Kong Shinmu's goal was first place. There were many dragon martial artists around, all of them surrounding the light pillar of the remaining 30 people and observing. Among them, the number of dragon martial artists around Kong Shinmu's light pillar was the highest, including the hidden expert. The skinny young man also came to the light pillar where Kong Shinmu was. A total of 10 people were observing Kong Shinmu's condition. Kong Shinmu, on the other hand, couldn't see these people clearly because he was surrounded by the surging attacks of the divine dragon souls. These attacks became more and more violent, more and more terrifying. Jiang Shenwu's celestial star dragon weapon's defensive patterns were all activated, increasing his defense by 20 times. But at this moment, they could not hold on any longer. As for the remaining 30 people, they each displayed their own abilities and extremely powerful defensive methods. Some relied on dragon weapons, while others relied on dragon martial techniques. Some dragon martial artists even had a dragon martial skill that could continuously restore their own strength, so that their dragon martial skill would not be exhausted. However, it was extremely difficult to cultivate this dragon martial skill, and it required the consumption of countless cultivation resources to achieve the final success. There was also the fusion of dragon weapons. By relying on the dragon weapons, one could directly disperse the attacks of the divine dragon souls in the surroundings. This was a battle style of attack, and it looked extremely hot-blooded. Even Kong Shinmu was a little envious. After all, it was so hot-blooded that it could arouse the passion in people's hearts. Attack against attack. As long as one continued to attack, one did not need to defend. It was really thrilling. As for Kong Shinmu, he used his physical body to resist all the attacks. In the eyes of the other dragon martial artists, this was also an extremely terrifying existence, and it made them extremely envious. Isn't this guy too strong? He used his physical body to resist. That's right, and his dragon weapon is also very strong. How terrifying is that defensive dragon weapon? If only I had the defensive dragon weapon, I would have been able to hold on until now. In the defensive round, it's useless no matter how long he lasts. Even if he becomes first in the end, his points won't be much higher than ours. That's right. After all, it's mainly about the final round's ranking. Everyone was talking about it, and Kong Shinmu had become the main topic of discussion. Among the last 128 dragon martial artists, there were men and women, old and young. Some of the old people looked like they had white hair, but they were extremely spirited. Generally, they were existences at the peak of the Dragon Emperor level. They were all at the peak of the ultimate Dragon Emperor level. Powerful existences that could explore permanent intermediate relics were the opponents that Kong Shinmu was about to face. Among them, there were even existences with the strength of a transcendent god stage too. Some of the women looked extremely strong, and they came from different sacred lands. Very few dragon martial artists from the same sacred land were still in this hall. However, if there were, they would definitely recognize each other and would definitely be standing together. This was because every dragon martial artist from a sacred land would have a specific sacred land symbol when they came to this hall. It was the same for Kong Shinmu. He had the symbol of the 5 extremes dark ice sacred land on him. However, Kong Shinmu did not have the time to think so much. The defensive pressure he faced was increasing. Another hour passed, and the strength of the attacks from the surrounding divine dragon souls doubled again. Now, it was increasing at a faster rate. As for Kong Shinmu, he maintained his peak condition as he continued to devour. However, at the same time, he could no longer devour all the attacks like before. Many of the attacks landed on his black dragon body, leaving some scars on his dragon scales. Although these scars healed rapidly, it finally showed that Kong Shinmu was starting to get injured. To many of the surrounding dragon martial artists, this meant that Kong Shinmu could not hold on any longer. However, to Kong Shinmu, this only meant that he was starting to feel the pressure. Getting injured? It couldn't be any more normal. Being able to recover immediately after being injured was the most terrifying thing about Kong Shinmu. In truth, his physical body's defensive ability was not top-notch. After all, the body-tempering dragon technique that he cultivated had not reached its peak. However, his recovery ability was at its peak. He had already broken through to the sacred tier with the dark dragon filth controlling art. Although it had not reached the sacred tier, it could already provide him with a terrifying recovery ability. When he was injured, the dark dragon filth controlling art would first help him recover. When he was recovering, he did not even realize where he was injured. All sorts of attacks came from all directions, but they could only cause some light injuries to Kong Shinmu. To Kong Shinmu, this was only a little bit of pressure. He still had more trump cards up his sleeve. At the very least, he had yet to use his devouring power to recover. He could still activate the brilliant ruby stone once. If he persisted for a long time, he could even activate the brilliant ruby stone 2 or 3 times to perform an absolute defense. These were his final trump cards. Chapter 5097. The defensive round continued. At this time, there were only 15 people left who were still holding on. A big guy failed in the end. He was an earth element divine dragon and a dragon warrior who specialized in defensive techniques. He had always been a solid shield in the team. His defense was so strong that even a 3rd-level supreme god would find it difficult to break through. He had thought that this defensive round would be his home ground. However, he did not expect that when he could no longer hold on, he would only be ranked 16th. When he came out, there were still 15 people who were holding on. After he came out, he observed the other people who were still holding on in the hall. Almost all the dragon martial artists had their own mystiques. Some of them had the advantage of dragon weapons, while others had the advantage of dragon martial techniques. Some of the first-stage Transcendent Divine Dragons had cultivated the Transcendent Divine Body Tempering Dragon Martial Techniques, or the Transcendent Divine Defense Dragon Martial Techniques. However, the most important thing was that 14 of the 15 people who were still on the field were at the Supreme God stage. The biggest advantage of the Supreme God Dragon Warriors compared to the Dragon Emperor at his peak was that they had boundless energy and could fight for a long time. If most dragon martial artists at the peak of the Dragon Emperor realm could only fight at full strength for an hour, then Supreme God-level dragon martial artists could fight at full strength for 10 to 10 hours. This was the biggest difference. In reality, this Earth attribute bulky defensive dragon warrior was ultimately defeated by him because he had exhausted all of his strength. Being able to hold on until now was already his limit. However, for the Supreme God Dragon Warriors, this was just the beginning. As long as they could defend, there would be no problem. Their energy had only been depleted by a small half. The big guy heaved a sigh of relief when he found out that most of the people on the field were at the Supreme God stage. He felt that there was no problem with his strength, but he had lost in terms of realm. In that case, my defense is still the best among those below the Supreme God stage. That's not right. He suddenly realized that the dragon warrior in a pillar of light was not at the Supreme God stage. It was at the peak of the Dragon Emperor. It was a black dragon, and there were already many dragon warriors watching. What's going on with this guy? How can he hold on for so long? The big guy came over and looked at Kong Shinmu. I don't know. It seems like he doesn't have any special methods. He just cultivates some body-tempering dragon martial techniques. Someone answered him. Furthermore, his body-tempering dragon martial skill and defensive dragon weapon are both pretty good. Someone else said. The big man frowned as he observed Kong Shinmu's defense in the small world inside the light beam. He couldn't help but shake his head. It was definitely not just that. Of the body-tempering dragon martial techniques, the big guy had cultivated 3 of them, and they were all heaven-grade Holy Spirit dragon martial techniques. Every single one of them had been cultivated to the saint level. Although they had not reached the extreme saint level, their effects were already close to the peak. He also had 2 specialized defensive dragon weapons, which together could increase his defensive power by more than 15 times. But even so, he still couldn't withstand it and was sent out after exhausting all of his energy. In this way, he had to use quite a few defensive dragon martial skills to be able to withstand it. With just his physical body, he could no longer withstand the attacks of the surrounding divine dragon souls. What's wrong with this guy? It's definitely not just a problem with the dragon martial skills and dragon weapons. When it came to defense, the big guy was extremely confident in himself. But now it seemed that Kong Shinmu's defense was stronger than his because of some special methods. Moreover, he didn't even use the defensive dragon martial skills. What he didn't know was that Kong Shinmu's advantage over him was that he had the power of devouring. This was something that no one else could learn. The existence of the power of devouring allowed Kong Shinmu to devour the attacking power around him. Naturally, he could reduce the power of the surrounding attacks by half. Moreover, after devouring, Kong Shinmu's resistance to the corresponding elemental power would be increased. This was the most important point. If Kong Shinmu had to face the strength of the divine dragon soul attacks right from the start, he really wouldn't have been able to withstand it. But these attacks were from weak to strong. When the attacks became tyrannical, Kong Shinmu's defense had also reached its peak state. At this time, these attacks were like tickles to him. Of course, the strength of these attacks was already extremely terrifying. Therefore, even when Kong Shinmu started to get injured, he recovered quickly. The effect of the Dark Dragon Filth controlling technique was directly activated. Even Kong Shinmu's devouring did not have to be used. I can still hold on for a long time, Kong Shinmu thought to himself. He could roughly feel that there were about 15 people in the hall who were still defending within the light pillar. But he didn't know the specific situation of those people. In Kong Shinmu's opinion, there must be a powerful supreme god-level expert who still had a lot of energy left. Therefore, he couldn't be careless. My physical body is still not strong enough. Kong Shinmu sighed. If his divine dragon tyrant body technique could be cultivated to the supreme sage realm, then his physical body would be strengthened to a whole new level. Then, the limits of the attacks he could withstand would be much higher than now. This was mainly because of the devouring power's existence to increase one's elemental resistance. This characteristic allowed him to cultivate one type of dragon refinement technique to achieve the effect of others cultivating 4 or 5 types of dragon refinement techniques. This was the most heaven-defying aspect. If Kong Shinmu cultivated many powerful dragon refinement techniques, then he would be truly invincible. Until now, Jiang Shenwu seemed to have found his own direction. The body-refining dragon martial technique and the devouring power complemented each other. This was the strongest him. As long as he could not be killed, then no matter how weak his attacks were, he would eventually be able to grind his opponent to death. Moreover, with the devouring power, Kong Shinmu could also simulate the opponent's attacks and use them to attack his opponent. Under such circumstances, Kong Shinmu did not need to specifically increase his offensive strength, of course. Sometimes, it was better to be able to kill the opponent in a second. The power of the 9th stage Extreme Dao Hui Dragon Burst was already quite terrifying. It was just that it was not as strong as he wished when facing stronger opponents. At this time, Kong Shinmu could only use the devouring power. The attack has become stronger again. The next moment, Kong Shinmu suddenly felt pressure. The attacks launched by the surrounding divine dragon souls had finally reached the level of Supreme God Level 3. At this time, it meant that the pressure on everyone was increasing. One had to know that the attack of Supreme God Level 3 was already equivalent to that of a Grade 6 disciple. Chapter 5098. The attack of a Level 3 Transcendent God finally arrived. Although Kong Shinmu could devour a portion of the power, the remaining power was still enough to tear a large wound on his black dragon body. The wind blade sliced through the dragon's scales. Lightning exploded and the dragon body was charred black. Raging flames burned and his entire body was on fire. However, these were all superficial wounds. To Kong Shinmu, they were not fatal and could not really hurt his foundation. When wounds appeared on his body, the dark dragon filth mastery began to explode and heal his wounds quickly. The attack of a Level 3 Transcendent God was a threat to Kong Shinmu, but it was not enough to defeat him. Of course, this was because the divine dragon souls were only using Level 3 Transcendent God attacks. As the attacks got stronger and stronger, Kong Shinmu might not be able to hold on when they reached the pinnacle of Level 3 Transcendent God attacks. However, there was not much pressure on Kong Shinmu now. On the other hand, the other dragon martial artists in the hall who were still defending in the small world of the Pillar of Light could not hold on much longer, even if they were Transcendent God dragon martial artists. A Level 1 Transcendent God dragon martial artist was definitely not weak. However, facing the attack of a Level 3 Transcendent God, this fellow's defensive dragon martial technique finally could not hold on. When faced with the surrounding attacks, his defensive barrier was shattered. Although this fellow quickly created more defensive barriers, at the same time, his power was being depleted several times faster. In just 5 minutes, this fellow's power was depleted. Unable to create more defensive barriers, his divine dragon body could not withstand a single blow. He was directly drowned in the attacks of the surrounding divine dragon souls. Then, this fellow was sent out of the small world of the Pillar of Light. When he came out, he was still panting. His power had been greatly depleted. When he looked around the hall, he heaved a sigh of relief. Number 10. That's right. Only 9 dragon martial artists were still holding on. As for the divine dragon souls in the small world of the Pillar of Light, they had already started to attack the intermediate Level 3 Transcendent God. Endless wind, rain, thunder, and lightning swept towards the remaining 9 people. The super strong attack was like a black cloud pressing down, shrouding in all directions. Kong Shinmu's injuries were getting more and more severe. At this point, the pressure on him had increased tremendously. Finally, he could no longer rely on the dark dragon inferiority to recover from his injuries. Isn't this guy too strong? Although he's injured, he can actually recover so quickly. He's only at the peak of the Dragon Emperor. How can he be so good at defense? Most people were moved by Kong Shinmu's performance. This was simply too heaven-defying. If this was the performance of a supreme god, it could be said that he had cultivated a supreme god body-tempering dragon martial technique. But Kong Shinmu was only at the peak of the Dragon Emperor's cultivation base. He could not cultivate supreme divine-grade body-refining dragon-type martial arts techniques. Could the Holy Spirit Dragon's martial skill really reach such a terrifying level of defense? Many people guessed that Kong Shinmu definitely had other hidden means that could not be seen on the surface. But naturally, they could not guess what exactly Kong Shinmu had up his sleeve. The power of devouring. This ability was probably not known to any dragon martial artist in this world. It's about time to use them together. Kong Shinmu finally made a decision at this time of great pressure. The Chen Xing dragon completely transformed into defensive war patterns. The Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal and the Divine Seal Rose Stone exploded. The two great defensive dragon weapons could naturally be stacked together. This raised Kong Shinmu's physical defense to a whole new level. The Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal could increase his defense by 10 times, and the Chen Xing dragon could increase his defense by 20 times. In total it was 30 times. At this moment, the golden light of the Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal enveloped Kong Shinmu. Then, the black dragon body was covered with the Chen Xing dragon's more than 6,000 defensive war patterns. These war patterns could only exert 30% of their effect. But even if it was only the effect of 2,000 war patterns, it could still increase one's defense by more than 20 times. This meant that Kong Shinmu's defense had increased again. When the attacks of the third stage Divine Dragon Souls bombarded Kong Shinmu's black dragon body, they were first blocked by the golden light shield of the Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal, and then blocked by the Chen Xing dragon's defensive war patterns. In the end, when they landed on Kong Shinmu's body, there was not much of their power left. They could only cause minor injuries to Kong Shinmu. At this time, Kong Shinmu became relaxed again. Moreover, he did not have to worry about the two defensive dragon weapons being destroyed. Be it the Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal or the Chen Xing dragon, their forging materials were extremely strong. There was no need to mention the Chen Xing dragon seal. The Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal had been bought by Kong Shinmu at a high price, and he had spent a lot of money to make it shine. Naturally, it was also a very strong defensive dragon weapon. The combination of the two allowed Kong Shinmu to withstand the attacks of a third-stage divine dragon. Moreover, Kong Shinmu did not feel too much pressure. Of course, this was when Kong Shinmu used the devouring power to devour all the elemental powers, allowing his physical body to reach its peak strength. If he was asked to block an attack of this level, he would probably have to use the brilliant ruby stone. No matter what, Kong Shinmu was still very relaxed, while the other 8 people in the hall seemed to be under a lot of pressure. Although some of them were not injured, they were using defensive dragon skills and did not cultivate body-tempering dragon skills. Once they were injured, it meant that they had failed. Therefore, when faced with a defensive test, the dragon warriors could not make any mistakes. Soon, 2 more people ran out of energy. As a result, they could not block the following attacks. They were drowned by the Divine Dragon Soul's attack and sent out of the light pillar. In the end, there were only 7 people left, and 3 of them were in danger. That guy is still inside. His situation seems to have improved again. Did he use 2 defensive dragon weapons? That's right. 2 defensive dragon weapons seem to be able to strengthen his physical defense. Those who cultivate body-tempering dragon skills are indeed powerful in terms of defense. If he were to use a defensive dragon skill, only 1 dragon weapon would be effective. However, Kong Shinmu had the body of a divine dragon, and his natural defense was strong. Therefore, the 2 dragon weapons could be stacked together. Of course, if there were more dragon weapons, the effect would not be as good. Instead of nurturing another defensive dragon weapon, it would be better to cultivate more body-tempering dragon skills. Now, Kong Shinmu had only obtained the Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal and created the Chen Xing dragon weapon. Otherwise, he would not have wanted to use 2 defensive weapons. After all, defense was never the first choice in a real battle. The attack has become stronger again. Chapter 5099. Kong Shinmu's 2 defensive dragon weapons were activated at the same time, protecting his black divine dragon body. The endless attacks from the dragon god's soul swept towards him from all directions, causing more and more wounds to appear on his dragon scales. The black dragon scales on his body had been damaged countless times, but they were healed by the recovery ability of the dark dragon filth controlling skill each time. But now, just the effects of the dark dragon inferiority technique alone could not completely heal his injuries. I can only rely on the devouring power. Kong Shinmu sighed in his heart. When he relied on the devouring power to heal himself, It meant that the devouring power could no longer convert the power into his own energy. He used part of the power he devoured to heal himself, while the other part was used to recover his strength. However, as the attacks became stronger and his injuries worsened, the power he devoured could only be used to heal himself. When that time came, Kong Shinmu would not be able to hold on any longer. If there was a specific opponent, Kong Shinmu could think about how to defeat his opponent and prevent himself from reaching that stage. However, now, there were endless attacks around him and there was no specific opponent at all. He could only continue to defend passively. Under such circumstances, he could only continue to persevere. There are still 7 people. No, there are still 6 people continuing. And 2 of them are almost unable to hold on any longer. Kong Shinmu could vaguely sense the situation of the others in the hall. As there were not many people left, he could roughly sense their state. Just now, another female dragon martial artist could not hold on any longer and retreated from the Pillar of Light. In the end, including Kong Shinmu, there were only 6 people left. Among them, 2 of them seemed to be quite weak. This meant that after these 2 people were eliminated, Kong Shinmu would only be left with 3 opponents. As long as he could hold on until the other 3 could no longer hold on, he would win. The power of a level 3 Transcendent God's attack had already put a lot of pressure on everyone. That was an attack that was close to the peak of a grade 6 disciple. It was not something they could casually block. Even if there were a few people who could block it, they basically had their own trump cards. For example, Kong Shinmu had too many trump cards. If it wasn't for the devouring power, he wouldn't have lasted until now. The others were the same. They all had their own secrets. Of course, it was impossible for it to be a terrifying power like the devouring power. Instead, it should only be some super powerful dragon weapons, dragon martial skills, or brilliant materials. There were brilliant materials that could increase the defensive prowess of a dragon warrior. There were also some void energy that could completely negate a portion of the opponent's attacks. To be able to persist until now, every single one of them had their own strengths. After all, these were the disciples of the holy lands of the entire dragon god's great world. There were bound to be some elites among them. If it was just the 5 extreme mysterious ice holy land, Kong Shinmu probably wouldn't be able to find many people who could compete with him. But now, Kong Shinmu felt a certain amount of pressure. Ran must have felt the same way back then, right? Kong Shinmu felt helpless. There were still many geniuses and experts in the dragon god's world. Even a genius like Ran couldn't get first place among the 4th-class disciples. It could be seen that Kong Shinmu had to be careful now. He didn't want to fail miserably. In the second round of the defense competition, Kong Shinmu's advantage was very obvious. He had to obtain the final victory. Brilliant ruby stone, open. Finally, after persevering for the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the energy in Jiang Shenwu's body was almost exhausted. He could only choose to open the brilliant ruby stone again and create an absolute defense barrier. The others also used the brilliant ruby stone to resist the attacks for a period of time. However, Kong Shinmu could gather enough energy for the brilliant ruby stone in a short period of time and use it again. The others could only use it once in 7 days. When Kong Shinmu opened the brilliant ruby stone, a golden light enveloped his entire body. Other than the black dragon's body, all the attacks were blocked by the golden light. This was a powerful defense barrier that could withstand a peak supreme god. When the surrounding attack power was at level 3 supreme god, it could completely resist for a long period of time. Kong Shinmu took advantage of this time to continuously devour the surrounding energy with his devouring power to recover his own energy. Soon, he recovered to his peak state. At the same time, he also converted a portion of the energy he devoured into the power of the brilliant ruby stone. The spectral energy battle patterns in Chen Xing's dragon weapon were all converted at this time and charged the brilliant ruby stone. However, because the 2 were not on the same dragon weapon, the efficiency of charging was not very high. In short, if Kong Shinmu wanted to use the brilliant ruby stone again, he might need another 5 minutes. The key to whether Kong Shinmu could survive the next 5 minutes was how he would spend it. Divine Dragon Tyrant Body Technique, Defense Stance. Chen Xing, Defense Battle Pattern Transformation. When the brilliant ruby stone's condensed barrier was about to shatter, Kong Shinmu once again returned to his defense stance. Then, his entire black dragon body soared into the air. The barrier shattered, and countless wind, rain, thunder, and lightning powers whistled in from the surroundings, drowning Kong Shinmu's black dragon. At this time, it was already at the peak of level 3 Supreme God. The terrifying destructive power instantly caused Kong Shinmu's black dragon body to suffer a strong impact, and his dragon scales shattered. However, unknowingly, the other dragon warriors in the hall had all been defeated. In the entire hall, Jiang Shenwu was the only one left who was still resisting. The last few dragon warriors who had been defeated had lasted almost the same amount of time. Now, the power of the attacks was really unbearable. If they could withstand it, they would no longer be 5th-class disciples. Why would they still be here? However, as 5th-class disciples, being able to last until now was already quite terrifying. And Kong Shinmu was clearly much stronger than them, at least in terms of defense. In the end, the few of them all came to the light pillar where Kong Shinmu was and observed the situation inside. This guy is actually only at the peak of the Dragon Emperor? We actually didn't last until the end. This Dragon Emperor is actually this strong at the peak. The difference of a major realm caused the strength of the dragon warriors to be extremely different. Generally speaking, the difference between the peak of the Dragon Emperor and level 1 Supreme God was like heaven and earth. Less than 1 in 10,000 dragon warriors could defeat an ordinary level 1 Supreme God when they were at the peak of the Dragon Emperor. And who was not talented enough to last until now? Chapter 5100. To these first-stage Transcendent God Dragon Warriors, they had always been the only ones who could challenge others. They had never encountered anyone who could challenge them. That was why they could resist the attacks of second-stage Transcendent Gods and even third-stage Transcendent Gods with their first-stage Transcendent Gods. They had indeed defeated some second-stage Transcendent Gods before. However, third-stage Transcendent Gods were still an insurmountable gap for them. One must not underestimate these fellows. Being able to jump levels to defeat an opponent at the level of a Transcendent God was not an easy task in itself. Basically, no one could jump 2 levels to defeat an opponent. That was why they were all favored by the heavens. The genius disciples of the various holy lands were famous in their respective holy lands. However, they were all silent now. They had not expected a dragon warrior from the 5 extreme mysterious ice holy land. He was only at the peak of the Dragon Emperor's divine dragon inheritance blood essence, but he was able to last until the end. The attack at the last moment had already reached the peak of 3rd stage Transcendent God. How could this guy block it? That was too terrifying. Everyone was observing Jiang Shenwu's every move in the small world of the Pillar of Light. They all remembered this black dragon in their hearts. In the next round, they would definitely have a certain amount of vigilance towards him. No matter what, a guy with such strong defense was worthy of their attention. In the small world of the Light Pillar, Kong Shinmu was still resisting the continuous attacks around him. His black dragon body was constantly being blasted with huge wounds. However, the devouring power devoured the power and transformed it into the essence of life and flesh to heal his injuries. This was the effect of the Dragon Emperor's devouring power. In the past, the devouring power could not devour ordinary power to heal his injuries. But now he could do it. Logically speaking, the devouring power could devour any power and transform it into any power. It could even devour any matter. This was the truly terrifying devouring power. However, the current Kong Shinmu could not find a way to completely control the devouring power. To him, the devouring power was still mysterious and difficult to control. But no matter what, this was the power that allowed him to rise and stand here. He didn't rely on the power of devouring, but at his current stage, it could indeed make him stronger. In any case, the black dragon's consciousness in his body was being suppressed by the demon god ancestor's consciousness. So Kong Shinmu could use the power of devouring without restraint. Devour! As Kong Shinmu's devouring power erupted, the surrounding attacks were all devoured by Kong Shinmu. This energy was quickly converted into the essence of flesh and blood to heal Kong Shinmu's injuries. A part of it was also replenished into the energy of the brilliant gem. His black dragon body was constantly being injured, but after being injured, it rapidly recovered. Finally, when Kong Shinmu devoured and healed his divine dragon body countless times, he suddenly felt a surge of heat surging through his body. This is a breakthrough? Kong Shinmu's heart thumped. At this critical juncture, he really did break through. However, it was not his cultivation that broke through, nor was it the grade of the divine dragon's inheritance blood essence, but the dragon martial technique. Divine Dragon Martial Technique, Divine Dragon Tyrant Body Technique, and High-Grade Origin Source Dragon Martial Technique, Dark Dragon Inferiority Technique. Of course, Kong Shinmu now knew that the Dark Dragon Inferiority Technique was not an ordinary high-grade Origin Source Dragon Martial Technique, but a simplified version of a Divine Dragon Martial Technique. The effect of the Dark Dragon Inferiority Technique was not very different from the original Divine Dragon Martial Technique, but it was much easier to cultivate. This was the reason why the Dark Dragon Inferiority Technique was so heaven-defying. Whether it was Ran Ran or Kong Shinmu, they had both improved a lot because they cultivated the Dark Dragon Inferiority Technique. Divine Dragon Tyrant Body Technique, Supreme Sage Realm. Dark Dragon Inferiority Technique, Supreme Sage Realm. These two main body-tempering dragon martial techniques that Kong Shinmu cultivated had both broken through to the Supreme Sage Realm. The Supreme Sage Realm was the highest realm. In other words, Kong Shinmu had cultivated these two dragon martial techniques to their limits, to the point where they could no longer be improved. The effect of this was that Kong Shinmu could now withstand the endless attacks of the divine dragon souls around him. Of course, he would still be injured, but the injuries would be very light. Even if he was injured, he could recover with the effect of the Dark Dragon Inferiority Technique. My defense has at least doubled, and my recovery speed has increased by at least 5 times. Kong Shinmu's breakthrough in these two dragon martial techniques had brought him a turning point. He had originally thought that he would not be able to hold on for much longer, but the breakthrough in these two dragon martial techniques allowed him to hold on for a longer period of time. It seems like I'm the only one left? Since he was the only one left, it did not matter whether he could hold on or not. In any case, Kong Shinmu had secured first place in the second round of defense. However, Kong Shinmu did not give up. This was because he remembered that he had received a hint. If he wanted to obtain the Heart of the Dragon's Soul, he had to perform well. The Heart of the Dragon's Soul was something related to the ancestral dragon. Chapter 5101. No one had expected Kong Shinmu to be able to break through under such circumstances. However, this was the truth. With the breakthrough of Kong Shinmu's two dragon-type body refining techniques, he had finally reached the true peak of the Dragon Emperor's inherited blood essence. Of course, if one had to say it, Kong Shinmu had yet to completely merge with the dragon weapon. However, this did not matter. The current Kong Shinmu could be said to be at the limit of the Dragon Emperor's peak. It was very difficult for other Dragon Emperor's peak cultivators to be stronger than him. This was because the other Dragon Emperor's peak cultivators might not even be able to break through Kong Shinmu's defense. As long as Kong Shinmu activated his Guardian mode, he would be invincible in front of the Dragon Emperor's peak. Of course, the prerequisite was that Kong Shinmu was in his current state, which was to use his devouring power to devour the various elemental powers to allow his resistance to reach its peak. If he were to fight one-on-one, Kong Shinmu would have to be careful. If some people attacked fiercely, it would not be easy for Kong Shinmu to block them. With Kong Shinmu's breakthrough, he could easily block the attacks from the surrounding divine dragon souls. Terrifying power kept sweeping over, but it could not break through his physical defense. Then, the surrounding divine dragon souls suddenly launched an even more terrifying attack. An attack at the level of the Transcendent God Stage 4. Wind, rain, thunder, lightning, ice, and flames dyed the entire small world of the Pillar of Light into a huge furnace. Kong Shinmu felt immense pressure once again. There was a huge gap between the Transcendent God Stage 4 and the Transcendent God Stage 3. The fourth level was the intermediate stage of the Transcendent God Stage, while the third level was the beginner stage of the Transcendent God Stage. There was an absolute suppression between them. Among all the Transcendent God Stage 3 dragon martial artists, only 100,000 or even 1 in a million dragon martial artists could defeat a Transcendent God Stage 4 opponent. This meant that the difference was even greater than the difference between the peak of the Dragon Emperor and the first stage of the Transcendent God. Now that a level 4 Transcendent God had attacked, Kong Shinmu was stunned. The black dragon scales on his body were instantly blasted into pieces. Then, these dragon scales were scorched, chopped into pieces, and dissipated in the wind, rain, and thunder. But Kong Shinmu did not give up. Although the attack caught him off guard, he was still able to react in time. Brilliant gemstone. His brilliant ornate stone had already recovered its energy. He had used his devouring power and spectral battle runes to recover its energy. At this moment, the golden light once again condensed into a barrier. After this barrier appeared, the surrounding attacks were all blocked outside. Kong Shinmu's black divine dragon body started to recover rapidly. He didn't use his devouring power, but instead relied on the Supreme Sage-level Dark Dragon Filth Mastery to recover rapidly. Too strong. The recovery ability of the Supreme Sage-level Dark Dragon Filth Mastery was simply terrifying. Kong Shinmu had seen Ran Ran's recovery speed before, but he didn't expect it to be so powerful when it happened to him. After all, he had never seen Ran Ran in a severely injured state. However, now that he thought about it, Ran Ran must have also been severely injured during the 4th class disciple competition, and then the Dark Dragon Filth Mastery kept recovering for her. Ran Ran had won the overall 2nd place in the 4th class disciple competition. Although it seemed like she was doing well, Kong Shinmu knew that she had suffered too much pain to obtain this glory. Although the Dark Dragon Filth Mastery could heal the injuries of dragon warriors, it wouldn't hide the pain that dragon warriors had suffered. When the injuries healed, it was impossible to remain indifferent to the heart-wrenching pain even if one was already used to it. Kong Shinmu was already used to this kind of pain, but he still found it unbearable every time. One could imagine that a girl like Ran Ran. Devour! When Kong Shinmu blocked the attack of the 4th stage Transcendent God, Kong Shinmu's devouring power spread rapidly. He hadn't reached his limit yet. 33 Heavenly Divine Feathers. Kong Shinmu finally started using the 33 Heavenly Divine Feathers. The 33 Heavenly Divine Feathers could enhance any of his dragon skills. He didn't cultivate any defensive dragon martial skill, but he cultivated an offensive dragon martial skill. Now, switch from defense to offense. Offensive stance. Kong Shinmu switched the Divine Dragon Tyrant Body Technique to an offensive stance. After cultivating the Divine Dragon Tyrant Body Technique to the Supreme Sage level, each stance could provide him with a 5-fold increase. In other words, under the offensive stance, the offensive power of any of Kong Shinmu's techniques would increase by 5 times. One had to know that he could only increase it by 1 time. This was a huge increase. At the same time, Kong Shinmu converted all the battle runes in the Dragon Soldier Chen Star into offensive battle runes. 9th Stage Ultimate Dragon Explosion. The 9th Stage Ultimate Dragon Explosion was unleashed together with the 33 Heavenly Divine Feathers. When the golden barrier of the brilliant gem was shattered, Kong Shinmu's 9th Stage Ultimate Dragon Explosion was finally unleashed. The 33 Heavenly Divine Feathers could only unleash 9 attacks now. However, Kong Shinmu's greatest trump card was also used. He had been devouring the power released by the divine dragon souls in the surroundings. At this time, he directly released this power from the devouring space, fusing it into his 9-stage Extreme Dao Dragon Explosion. Borrowing power to attack. The power that attacked him was directly devoured by Kong Shinmu and integrated into his own attack. This increased the power of his 9th-stage Ultimate Dragon Explosion by dozens of times. 81 pitch-black dragon breath swept out in all directions. With just a bang, all the surrounding attacks were shaken away. This scene immediately caused all the dragon martialists in the hall who were paying attention to Jiang Xinwu to be completely shocked. It can't be? It's one thing for this guy's defense to be so terrifying, but his attack is also so strong? Using attack power to deal with attack. We've had people use this method before. But it's not as exaggerated as him. Look at this kid, he's suffering from an attack at the 4th level of the Transcendent God stage. That's right. We can at most fight against the 2nd level of the Transcendent God stage. At most, we won't be able to withstand it at the 3rd level. No. Look carefully. The aura of his attack is similar to the power outside. What's the principle behind this? In other words, he's borrowing power to attack and using the power of the attack to repel other powers. He can do that? After some discussion, everyone realized that Kong Shinmu's method was unique. Chapter 5102. In this way, the crowd was not as shocked as before. After all, if Kong Shinmu's own strength could compete with a level 4 Transcendent God, the others would not even need to fight. However, even if it was as they had guessed, Kong Shinmu's ability to borrow the power of the surrounding attacks was still shocking. That was because the attacks around him were at the level of a level 4 Transcendent God. Kong Shinmu could actually borrow such a powerful attack. To be honest, the crowd could already feel the heavy pressure. Kong Shinmu was too powerful. He was so powerful that they did not dare to imagine it. Was he really a grade 5 disciple? Or was he really a dragon martial artist at the peak of the Dragon Emperor level? If they had not seen it with their own eyes, they would have believed it if someone said that he was at the level 3 transcendent god. Moreover, Kong Shinmu had just used the brilliant ruby stone twice. Looks like this kid is very rich. The brilliant gem stone was expensive, and it didn't come in handy often. It could only save one's life at critical moments. In a real crisis, one could not rely on the brilliant ruby stone to save one's life. After all, one could only face many crises alone. At such a time, even if one used the brilliant ruby stone to delay time, it would be useless. Those who deserved to die would still die. Moreover, its high price made many dragon martial artists flinch. Therefore, there were very few people who would prepare 2 brilliant gemstones. Now that Kong Shinmu had used the brilliant ruby stone twice, the crowd knew that Kong Shinmu had most likely used the brilliant ruby stone twice on different dragon weapons. This was not a big problem. The key was that Kong Shinmu had displayed the ability to borrow the power around him. Generally speaking, it was not as if others had not seen such power before. Many of the experienced and knowledgeable dragon martial artists of the older generation had seen such power before. Many of them had seen it with their own eyes. However, the key was that it was not that exaggerated. This kind of method was usually only used on opponents of similar strength. At most, the opponent couldn't be too much stronger than the user. Otherwise, it would be impossible to borrow strength, and the opponent would be directly defeated. There were some older dragon martialists present. It wasn't because they were old, but because they had rich experiences. They had even explored intermediate permanent remnants before, and had even made some achievements. They had all reached the peak of the Dragon Emperor. However, he couldn't imagine what was going on with Kong Shinmu's ability. Devouring power. The devouring power was naturally not something that ordinary people could imagine. If Kong Shinmu had simply borrowed power, it would have been impossible for him to come to such an occasion. However, the key point was that he had the devouring power, which was the key. When it came to testing Kong Shinmu's limits, the devouring power would always be his final trump card. At this moment, he was constantly using his devouring power to devour the energy around him, and then explosively, fusing it with a 9-stage extreme Dao Qi Dragon explosion. At this time, he didn't use the multiple attacks of the 33 divine feathers. He only used the 9-stage extreme Dao Qi Dragon explosion. No matter how many times he used the 9-stage extreme Dao Qi Dragon explosion, it wouldn't help the situation. After all, he was mainly relying on the energy that he had devoured, not his own power. Therefore, even if the 9-stage extreme Dao Qi Dragon explosion exploded with 33 attacks, the power wouldn't be very strong. Instead, it would expose his trump card. In this competition of defense, I have basically exposed all my trump cards. Therefore, I have to hide the 33 divine feathers. Now that Kong Shinmu had only used the 9-stage extreme Dao Qi Dragon explosion, others might think that it was just the 9-stage gem, but he would let them think so. At the crucial moment, Kong Shinmu's 33 attacks would explode and become his real trump card. At this moment, Kong Shinmu kept using the 9-stage extreme Dao Qi Dragon explosion. It seemed like he was easily blocking all the attacks around him. However, in reality, the energy that Kong Shinmu had devoured previously was dissipating at an extremely fast speed. After all, the energy that he had devoured previously was only from the 2nd and 3rd stage of the Transcendent God stage. When facing the attacks of the 4th stage of the Transcendent God stage, he needed to integrate a large amount of energy into it to be able to fight against it. Therefore, the energy that Kong Shinmu had devoured from the devouring space was being consumed at an extremely fast speed. According to Kong Shinmu's estimation, he could probably only last for an hour at most. In fact, it might not even last for an hour. Just as he used the energy that he had devoured to integrate into the 9-stage extreme Dao Qi Dragon explosion to fight against the attacks around him, the strength of the attacks around him increased once again. Transcendent God Stage 4. Intermediate. Previously, the attack strength was the same as when he had just entered the 4th stage of the Transcendent God stage. Now, it had increased by another level. Every stage of the Transcendent God stage was divided into beginner, intermediate, advanced, and peak stages. Of course, these stages were just general stages. During cultivation, there would be no obvious signs of a breakthrough. However, the levels of power were obviously different. Every time there was a difference in level, there would be a change in strength. Strength determined the level, not the level. Therefore, if Kong Xinmu broke through to the first stage of the Transcendent God stage, he could be considered to be at the peak of the first stage of the Transcendent God stage. This was because his strength had already reached the peak of the first stage of the Transcendent God stage. When the surrounding attack power increased by a level, the pressure on Kong Xinmu suddenly increased. He did not even have time to integrate the energy that he had devoured into his 9-stage extreme Dao Qi Dragon explosion. Devour! 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 Now, Kong Xinmu could only devour and weaken the surrounding attack power through devouring. Then, he would integrate it into his 9-stage extreme Dao Qi Dragon explosion and counterattack. That way, he could still barely withstand the current attack. However, he was already close to his limit. Especially now, the energy in his devouring space was being consumed faster and faster. Soon it would be used up. Hold on. Kong Xinmu gritted his teeth and held on. Now, he had already endured to a stage that others did not even dare to think about. Even an ordinary Transcendent God Stage 3 Dragon Warrior would not be able to hold on for even a moment. However, Kong Xinmu was still able to hold on for so long. The Dragon Warriors who were observing Kong Xinmu were all dumbfounded. This guy can still hold on? How is that possible? Is this guy really only at the peak of the Dragon Emperor? Based on the strength that he has displayed now, he will most likely get first place in the third round of the competition. That might not be the case. However, this guy is definitely one of the strong contenders for first place. Everyone was shocked and their expressions were solemn. This was because they would all be participating in the third round of the competition. It was as if a shadow had been cast over them. No one wanted to meet Kong Xinmu in the third round. Chapter 5103. The attack of the fourth stage Transcendent God followed closely behind. Kong Xinmu did not last long before he was attacked by the strongest attack he had ever encountered. Previously, when he was training in the Outland Stronghold, he had never encountered such an attack. This was because he had to choose his opponents when he was training. He would only provoke suitable opponents. But now, the intensity and difficulty of the attacks had increased without limit, so he had no choice but to challenge them. Is this for me to find my limit? Kong Xinmu gritted his teeth and endured. He felt that he had already exerted all his strength, and there was almost nothing else he could do. The only thing that could make him persevere was the 12 types of battle patterns on the Chen Xing Dragon Soldier. However, many of the battle patterns were ones that Kong Xinmu wanted to hide, and he planned to use them at the last moment. If he used them now for others to see, then his opponent would be prepared at the crucial moment of the final battle. For example, the shadow battle patterns. It was obvious that the shadow battle patterns would be effective in such a defensive environment. They could condense more than 20 doppelgangers of Kong Xinmu's black dragon body and absorb most of the attacks. Kong Xinmu could also continuously condense doppelgangers to absorb the attacks, which would allow him to persist for at least 15 minutes. However, he did not want to use this method now. The other battle patterns on the Chen Xing Dragon Soldier were in a similar situation. He did not intend to expose more of his methods unless it was necessary. In that case, the only method I can look forward to now is the devouring power? Kong Xinmu could not help but smile bitterly. The devouring power was really his greatest trump card. Ever since he had stepped onto the path of cultivation as a dragon warrior, the devouring power had always been the one to solve all his problems whenever he encountered extreme difficulties. Unfortunately, the black dragon's consciousness was very low-key now, and it did not dare to make too many movements in the Dragon Soul Sacred Tower. It did not even dare to communicate with Kong Xinmu, and it just hid in the devouring space. The demon god ancestor's consciousness was the same. Kong Xinmu could not ask them, so he could only figure it out himself. How else can the devouring power be used? The black dragon consciousness previously mentioned that this devouring power can devour all matter and all energy. In that case, can I devour the space around me and isolate myself from the surrounding forces? Kong Xinmu did as he thought. He really couldn't hold on any longer, but he wanted to challenge his limits. Everything in the Dragon Soldier Star was external, and he did not intend to borrow too much from it. That way, the results he obtained would not be his real results. If he could do that with his devouring power, that would be his fundamental ability. When he had the thought of devouring space, a pitch-black devouring power surged around his black dragon body and began to devour the surrounding space. The space surrounding Kong Shinmu was completely swallowed up. This scene caused the dragon warriors who were observing Kong Shinmu to be dumbfounded. What kind of technique was this? The circle of space that had been devoured became incomparably pitch-black, as if nothing existed. Then, they could no longer see Kong Shinmu's divine dragon body. They could only see the surrounding forces bombarding the pitch-black circle of space and then vanishing. All the forces disappeared as if they had been devoured by a black hole. No one knew how Kong Shinmu, who was in the pitch-black circle of space, was doing. Had he not been attacked by those forces? Or was he unable to hold on any longer? What was that circle of black space? No one guessed that it was a space that had been devoured, but some people still felt that it had something to do with the spatial attribute Void Force. I also relied on the Void Force to get to the 30th place. The hidden expert that Kong Shinmu had been paying attention to, the skinny young man, could not help but narrow his eyes when he saw Kong Shinmu's situation. This skinny young man was very perceptive, or rather, had intuition. After all, when they were observing from the outside, they could not sense the situation inside the Pillar of Light pocket world. It was difficult to guess many things just by looking at it with the naked eye. However, this skinny young man intuitively felt that Kong Shinmu had used a spatial attribute Void Force technique. It had to be said that this young man had guessed half of it correctly. This young man had considerable attainments in the spatial attribute Void Force. In fact, a large part of his concealment ability came from the spatial attribute Void Force. That was the power of his divine dragon blood essence, the dragon martial technique that he cultivated, and some fortuitous encounters. Just like how Gu Xinyue had obtained the psychedelic astral crystal, this kind of fortuitous encounter had a great effect on improving one's strength. And now, in the field, Kong Shinmu had used his devouring power to devour the space around his divine dragon body. Then, he felt as if he had been isolated from the entire Pillar of Light pocket world. All the light, sound and energy around him had disappeared. It was as if Kong Shinmu had arrived in an abandoned pocket world that was completely isolated from the outside world. What's going on? Kong Shinmu had a strange expression on his face. The extremely fierce attack just now had suddenly disappeared. He was at a loss as to what to do. He had seen the ability to devour space before. In the relic of the heavenly deficient demonic dragon of Ice and Fire's inheritance, Kong Shinmu had seen a sacred item that could burn space. That sacred item had finally combined into a sacred item that was rebranded. Now in his master's hands. Come to think of it, that heaven and earth saint item also had the ability to devour or burn space. So, this ability shouldn't be too heaven-defying, right? Kong Shinmu thought to himself. But what he did not know was that although this ability was not rare, it was extremely rare in the current dragon god's great world. The sacred item that the heavenly deficient demonic dragon of Ice and Fire had come from a long time ago. And now, the ability that Kong Shinmu displayed to devour space had directly attracted the attention of the Dragon's Soul Holy Tower. Or rather, his devouring power had long attracted the attention of the Dragon's Soul Holy Tower. That was why he had received a notification from the Dragon's Soul Holy Tower when he exited the pocket world. Of course, the notification was undoubtedly kind. The Dragon's Soul Holy Tower had no ill intentions towards Kong Shinmu. It was the same at this moment. The entire Pillar of Light pocket world had undergone some changes after he displayed his ability to devour space. No one could see that the entire Pillar of Light pocket world had shrunk as a result. The circle of pitch-black space that had been devoured was gradually filled up by the surrounding space. The Dragon's Soul Holy Tower did not appear. Instead, it directly repaired the Pillar of Light pocket world. When the Pillar of Light pocket world was completely repaired, Kong Shinmu would face a storm of attacks from all around again. At that time, he would not be able to continue devouring space. Chapter 5104. In theory, Kong Shinmu's devouring power could devour any energy and matter, even space. However, there was a limit to the total amount of energy and matter that he could devour. The limit was his devouring space. As his cultivation level increased, his devouring space expanded continuously. Now, the size of his devouring space was 100 times larger than when he had just stepped into the Dragon Emperor realm. As the devouring space expanded, Kong Shinmu could devour and store more energy and resources. However, at that moment, Kong Shinmu had only devoured a little bit of space, and the devoured space had almost filled up the devouring space. Isn't this space too big? Kong Shinmu was a little puzzled, but he also understood that it was not because the devouring space was too big, but because the devoured space itself occupied a larger space within the devouring space. That was why the devouring space was already filled up when he had only devoured a little bit of space. At that moment, he could no longer devour space. The power of the Dragon Soul Holy Tower to repair the space was extremely powerful. Basically, it only took a moment for the devoured space to be repaired. Meanwhile, Kong Shinmu was once again facing the attacks of the divine dragon souls from all directions. At this moment, Jiang Shenwu released the space he had devoured and bombarded it in all directions. These spaces, upon leaving the devoured space, shrunk to their normal size and filled up the space of the small world within the Pillar of Light. Unfortunately, it could not stop the attacks of the surrounding divine dragon souls. Most importantly, the attacks of the surrounding divine dragon souls had finally transformed again. They had reached the level of the Transcendent God Stage 5. In the face of continuous attacks of this level, Kong Shinmu really could not resist them. The next moment, Kong Shinmu's black dragon body no longer struggled in vain. Although he could still use the brilliant gem once and some other techniques, to Kong Shinmu, this was almost his limit. If he persisted any longer, he would not be able to persist until the surrounding attacks increased again. The beginner stage of Transcendent God Level 5 was almost enough to kill Kong Shinmu. He couldn't hold on for that long, so he didn't have to struggle anymore. He could also avoid exposing more of his trump cards for others to see. Finally, Kong Shinmu was blasted out of the small world by a 5th stage Transcendent God. However, even though he was blasted out, the surrounding dragon martial artists were still extremely shocked. Although they didn't know what kind of technique Kong Shinmu had used, the fact that he could persist for so long and use a technique that most people couldn't understand had left a deep impression on them. Devour space. This was not something that a dragon martial artist could see at any time and place. Now, it was even rarer for the 5th-class disciples of the various supreme sacred grounds to see through this technique. Only the skinny young man, the hidden expert, narrowed his eyes at the last moment, as if he had seen through something. Of course, he didn't completely understand Kong Shinmu's method of devouring space. However, he was clearer than others and knew that Kong Shinmu had used the power and ability of space. The second round of the 5th-class disciple competition, Defense Trial. 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land. Kong Shinmu wins first place. As the majestic voice of the Dragon Soul Sacred Tower resounded throughout the entire hall, everyone looked at Kong Shinmu in shock. They had never thought that the first place of this defense trial would be won by a dragon martial artist at the peak of the Dragon Emperor realm. There were so many supreme god-level powerhouses, but none of them could defeat this Dragon Emperor peak dragon martial artist. This was too shocking. What kind of monster did the 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land produce? Everyone was thinking that just the number of points Jiang Shenwu had obtained from taking first place in this trial of defense alone was enough for the 5 Extreme Mysterious Ice Holy Land's overall score to enter the top 10. If Kong Shinmu could still obtain first place in the third round of the final battle, the 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land would definitely enter the top 3. This was under the premise that the other 5th-class disciples of the 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land were performing poorly. Kong Shinmu didn't know any of the other 5th-class disciples of the 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land. Thus, he didn't pay too much attention to them. However, when he looked around, he discovered that there were 2 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land disciples who had actually stayed until the last round. This means that among the final 128 people, 3 of them are from the 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land. Kong Shinmu smiled slightly. This meant that the 5th-class disciple competition of the 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land was quite stable. As long as he obtained first place, the 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land could even make a run for first place. Of course, the exact ranking still depended on the performance of the other 2. But no matter what, the number of points that Kong Shinmu had obtained was already quite terrifying. It was enough to bring him many rewards. Whether it was the final reward from the Dragon Soul Sacred Tower or the final reward from the 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land, they were enough for him to obtain many resources. These resources were very useful to him. The most important thing was to unseal the seal on the small universe. This required a lot of cultivation resources. In fact, Kong Shinmu felt that completely unsealing the seal was something that would take an indefinite amount of time. He was far from seeing any hope of doing so. He had only unsealed 2 layers of seal, yet he had already spent so many resources. He had trained in the Outer Realm Fortress for more than half a year and had also made great contributions. Even so, he was only able to unseal 2 layers of seal on the small universe. From this, it could be seen just how many cultivation resources were needed to unseal the seal on the small universe. Cultivation resources were what Kong Shinmu needed the most right now. If he could unseal 3 layers of seal on the small universe, then Kong Shinmu would have a much better chance of entering a permanent mid-grade ruin. Next, I need to find a companion to fight against the Dragon Soul Golem. Kong Shinmu looked at the skinny youth that he had his eyes on. This was the fellow with an extremely strong concealment ability. Of course, he also glanced at the 2 5th-class disciples of the 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land. After all, they were all from the 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land, so he still had to consider the feelings of his own people. However, when Kong Shinmu looked over, he discovered that the 2 disciples of the 5 Extremes Mysterious Ice Holy Land had already formed a small team. The man and woman had already joined forces and were planning to fight against the Dragon Soul Golem together. In reality, although they wanted to be with Kong Shinmu, it was clear that they weren't on the same level. The man and woman were both ranked outside the top 100. If they were with Kong Shinmu, they would basically drag Kong Shinmu down. Chapter 5105. Kong Shinmu wasn't surprised by the choice of the male and female disciples of the 5 Extreme Mysterious Ice Holy Land. And Kong Shinmu didn't plan to form a team with the other Supreme God-level Dragon Martial Artist disciples. This was because the strength of the Dragon Soul Demon statue depended on the challenger's cultivation base. Kong Shinmu and the Hidden Youth were both at the peak of the Dragon Emperor level. This meant that if the 2 of them formed a team, the strength of the Dragon Soul Demon statue would be much lower than that of the other teams, and it would be easier for them to defeat the Dragon Soul Demon statue they encountered. "How should I address you, brother?" The hidden powerhouse, the skinny youth, came forward and asked Kong Shinmu with a smile. "Kong Shinmu, what about you?" Kong Shinmu asked back. "Call me Yi-in." The skinny youth nodded and said, "Yi-in." Kong Shinmu also nodded, and the 2 of them walked together toward the center of the hall. After the defense challenge round, there was a casual round of challenging the Dragon Soul Demon statues. This round didn't count towards the points of the competition between the Holy Lands, but the rewards that each person could obtain were closely related to their results. In the center of the hall, there were already 2 teams that had been teleported to the Dragon Soul Demon statue space. There were fewer and fewer Dragon Martial Artist disciples in the hall. Soon, it was Kong Shinmu and Yi Yin's turn. When they stood in the center of the hall, they felt a pillar of light descend and envelop them. Immediately after, they felt that they had been teleported to another space. This was the hall of an ancient temple. There were a total of 4 walls around the shrine hall. On each wall, there were 3 lifelike statues of divine dragons. These divine dragon statues were made of black metal crystals, and each of them exuded a tyrannical aura of dragon energy. There are a total of 12 Dragon Soul Demon statues, and each of them has a different attribute and power. I heard that as long as one can defeat a Dragon Soul Demon statue, one can obtain a good reward. If all 12 Dragon Soul Demon statues are defeated, the rewards will be unimaginable. Kong Shinmu thought. His partner, Yi-in, seemed to have the same idea. "Let's discuss our tactics. We'll take turns to hide and ambush the Dragon Soul Golems," Kong Shinmu whispered to Yi-in. "Of course, it depends on the specific situation." "All right." Yi-in nodded. The reason why Kong Shinmu sought him out was not only because he could conceal himself well, but also because his defense was not weak. Under such circumstances, it could be inferred that Yi Yin's attack power was definitely not too weak. Of course, the 2 of them were very likely to become opponents in the 3rd round of the battle. Under such circumstances, it was worth considering whether they should unleash their full strength when challenging the Dragon Soul Golem. Kong Shinmu didn't mind. Yi-in probably wouldn't pose any threat to Kong Shinmu in the 3rd round of the battle. The 2 of them didn't have much time to prepare. As they entered the hall of the Divine Hall, a divine dragon statue on the wall in front of them suddenly seemed to come to life. The divine dragon statue suddenly loosened, then let out a dragon roar, and flew up in the empty hall. It's a water attribute dragon soul demon statue. Get ready to fight. Kong Shinmu immediately said in a deep voice. Yi Yin directly transformed into a dragon in front of Kong Shinmu without thinking, and then hid himself. If Jiang Shenwu didn't activate the clear battle rune, he really couldn't find any traces of him. However, it was impossible for Lin Li to frame Kong Shinmu in this round of challenging the Dragon Soul Demon statue, as it wouldn't benefit either party. Therefore, Kong Shinmu didn't care about Yi Yin's position. He directly transformed into a dragon and released the Divine Dragon Tyrant Body technique to protect himself. Chen Xing, Defensive Battle Runes. Kong Shinmu immediately went into a state of full defense. This was because Kong Shinmu wasn't very sure about the strength of the opponent's Dragon Soul Demon statue. It seemed to be at the second stage of the Super Divine Dragon, but if it was so easy on the surface, this round of challenging the Dragon Soul Demon statue wouldn't be so difficult for so many dragon warriors. Kong Shinmu directly went forward. The Dragon Soul Golem exuded a water-attributed aura, and the space around it began to churn violently. When Kong Shinmu rushed forward, the Dragon Soul Demon statue suddenly erupted. Countless water vapor exploded in the space of the hall, and the exploding water attribute power rolled up rolling waves that swept toward Kong Shinmu like a huge wave that drowned his entire black dragon body. The power of the Dragon Soul Demon statue was indeed at the second stage of the Super Divine Dragon statue. For Kong Shinmu, this level of attack strength was no longer a threat to him. In particular, he was still in the state he was in during the second round of defense. It hadn't been long. The various attribute attack power that he had devoured previously still made his resistance to all attribute attacks the strongest. Therefore, the Dragon Soul Demon statue's huge wave explosion did not pose any threat to Kong Shinmu. On the contrary, Kong Shinmu immediately released his own attack after blocking the opponent's attack. Offensive stance. 9th stage Ultimate Dragon Explosion. Kong Shinmu's Chen Xing completely transformed into offensive battle runes. At the same time, the effect of the 33 Heavens Divine Feathers was also activated by Kong Shinmu, and nearly 100 dragon explosions were released. The terrifying power instantly exploded in the hall of the hall. At the same time, Yi Yin also attacked. The black dragon body that he had transformed into was like a ghost. When he suddenly appeared in the hall, a pitch-black dragon's breath suddenly erupted and shot toward the Dragon Soul Demon statue. The power of the attack was not inferior to Kong Shinmu's 9th stage Ultimate Dragon Explosion at all. Furthermore, the attack was more compact and concentrated on one point. This way, it would be easier to break through the opponent's defense. To Kong Shinmu, this attack method was very compatible with him. As expected. Although the power of the attacks from both sides was similar, Kong Shinmu's attack was divided into nearly 100 dragon explosions. On the other hand, Yi Yin's attack was concentrated on one point and directly penetrated the body of the Dragon Soul Demon statue. To Jiang Shenwu, this was simply the best news he had ever received. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Kong Shinmu directly released endless devouring power and poured it into the body of the Dragon Soul Demon statue. Although it was only a Dragon Soul Demon statue and not a living creature, the devouring power could still touch the opponent's weakness. Devour. Chapter 5106. The cooperation between Kong Shinmu and Yi Yin was flawless. Without any superfluous moves, Kong Shinmu's devouring power entered the Dragon Soul Golem, constantly devouring its power. The first water elemental Dragon Soul Golem was almost defenseless in front of Kong Shinmu and Yi Yin. Although Yi Yin didn't know what was going on. However, he could clearly sense that the Dragon Soul Golem was constantly weakening under Kong Shinmu's attacks. Its aura was getting weaker and weaker, and it soon lost its original combat strength. What's going on? It's as if Kong Shinmu is devouring the Dragon Soul Demon statue's fighting strength. Yi Yin's feeling was not wrong, but he could not confirm it. All in all, it was a good trend for him. The stronger Kong Shinmu was, the easier it would be for them to defeat the Dragon Soul Golems. Yi Yin was not only teaming up with Kong Shinmu to deal with the Dragon Soul Golem, but he was also observing Kong Shinmu's actions. He wanted to figure out Kong Shinmu's combat strength so that he wouldn't have to face Kong Shinmu in the third round. That was also what they had to do when they formed teams of twos to deal with the Dragon Soul Golems. At this moment, wasn't Kong Shinmu also observing Yi Yin? Although Yi Yin was defeated by Kong Xinmu in the first round of the Worldlet battle, it did not mean that he was vulnerable. At that time, he probably didn't react in time. If Yi Yin had displayed the same defensive ability as he did in the second round, it would have been difficult for Kong Xinmu to defeat him in one move. Therefore, this Yi Yin's reaction is a little slow. Or rather, his sense of danger is lacking. Kong Xinmu thought. At that time, Yi Yin had been hiding, and no one had been able to find him. During the chaotic battle in the small world, he had not made a move and had been observing the others. At that time, Kong Xinmu had killed everyone else, leaving him alone. He had not expected that Kong Xinmu would be able to discover his hiding place and attack the void directly. Therefore, when Kong Xinmu made his move, he was unable to react in time. This meant that Yi Yin's reaction was slightly slower and his sense of danger was lacking. Since that was the case, Kong Xinmu didn't need to care too much about Yi Yin's other aspects of combat strength. If he met him in the duel stage, he could directly use this method to fight. Yi Yin wouldn't be a match for him at all. Most importantly, with Kong Xinmu's defensive means, he could easily hold his ground against anyone. At this moment, with Kong Xinmu's devouring and Yi Yin's continuous dragon martial skill attacks, countless holes appeared on the body of the water attribute Dragon Soul Demon statue, and its strength became weaker and weaker. Soon, the water attribute Dragon Soul Demon statue was no longer a threat to Kong Xinmu and Yi Yin. With a loud bang, it exploded. The power of the water attribute scattered and collapsed in all directions in the temple. Then, Kong Xinmu and Yi Yin both discovered several shiny objects at the place where the Dragon Soul Demon statue exploded. What's this? Kong Xinmu and Yi Yin looked at each other and went forward to take a look. They found a total of 5 crystal-like objects. Although I don't know what they are, there are 5 of them. How are we going to divide them between the two of us? Kong Xinmu slightly frowned and secretly raised his guard. He didn't intend to fight with Yi Yin, but he had to guard against him. Yi Yin laughed and said, Kong Xinmu, there are 5 of them in total. You take 3, and I'll take 2. What do you think? If we can defeat the next Dragon Soul Demon statue, we'll split them. What do you think? Okay. Kong Xinmu nodded. This Yi Yin was very sensible. He knew how to take a step back. They didn't know what these crystals were used for, but since they appeared in the Dragon Soul Demon statue, they couldn't be useless. Kong Xinmu got 3 first, and Yi Yin took 2. Then, the two of them sensed that 2 of the Dragon Soul Demon statues around them were moving at the same time. 2 Dragon Soul Demon statues. This time, they were Dragon Soul Demon statues with fire and lightning attributes. When the 2 Dragon Soul Demon statues began to move, Kong Xinmu and Yi Yin both felt a great deal of pressure. It seems that the difficulty of the Dragon Soul Demon statues is indeed getting higher and higher. Not only are the Dragon Soul Golems twice as powerful as the previous Water Elemental Dragon Soul Golem, but there are 2 of them at the same time. Kong Xinmu and Yi Yin looked at each other and nodded. The previous Dragon Soul Demon statue was a bit easy to deal with. But now, the difficulty had increased by at least 4 times. Besides, Kong Xinmu roughly understood that the 5 crystals were a trap set by the Dragon Soul Tower. They would team up and challenge the Dragon Soul Demon statues. Who would be willing to suffer losses? When the 5 crystals appeared, there might be a fight already. On the other hand, Yi Yin handled it well by taking the initiative to let himself suffer losses and avoid a conflict with Kong Xinmu. Besides, there were some hidden dangers in such a setup. For example, in the first round of the Dragon Soul Demon statues, Kong Xinmu obtained 3 crystals, while Yi Yin only obtained 2. In that case, would Yi Yin attack Kong Xinmu when he realized that he couldn't defeat more Dragon Soul Demon statues in the next round? When he couldn't get more crystals, he would deal with his companions first and perhaps get more crystals. This kind of mentality was very normal. Of course, since they were able to come to the Dragon Soul Sacred Tower and pass through the trials to reach this round, none of the dragon martial artists would turn against them so easily. After all, everything was monitored by the Dragon Soul Tower. Who knew if the final score would be related to their performance? It wasn't just their combat strength, but also their temperament. All in all, there were some traps set up, and they just didn't step on them. Kong Xinmu only needed to cooperate with Yi Yin and kill as many Dragon Soul Demon statues as possible. At this moment, two Dragon Soul Demon statues appeared at the same time. One was of the fire attribute, while the other was of the thunder attribute. Kong Shinmu went to block the thunder attribute Dragon Soul Demon statue. Yi Yin, on the other hand, went to block the fire attribute Dragon Soul Golem. Without the slightest superfluous words, both sides began to erupt. Kong Shinmu cast a guardian stance and began to devour the thunder impact power launched by the thunder attribute Dragon Soul Demon statue. All the power almost enveloped Kong Shinmu's entire black dragon body. Then he moved with a loud bang. The terrifying power almost made Kong Shinmu unable to hold on. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.